that you all are joining us today, and welcome to our virtual school site visit journey with Mark Twain Elementary. One virtual visit in our series of virtual visits with our second cohort of IPP demonstration sites from across Washington State. At the Herring Center for Inclusive Education at the University of Washington, we are thrilled to be partnering with OSPI and some exemplary schools, one of which is here to share their journey with you today. So here with us today from the Herring Center for Inclusive Education, our demonstration sites lead, Cassie Martin, and inclusion specialist, Christina Nowak. My name is Naomi Fair, and I'll be facilitating our webinar with IPP demonstration site Mark Twain today. Our project coordinator, Molly Lyman, is here in the case you experience any technological issues. So let's get set up for our webinar. As we get started, please test your audio in the bottom left-hand corner of the menu. And before we dive in, let's make sure we have everything ready to get started. So thank you for sharing comments and ideas in the chat today. Because of the number of people participating, we'll not be answering questions or responding via the chat. If you'd like our presenters to answer a question, please use the Q&A feature instead. We'll be recording today's webinar, and it will be provided on the Herring Center's demonstration sites webpage. The recording from today will be available by the end of this month. As we go through the webinar, please keep this webinar etiquette in mind. We encourage a growth mindset where you are open to thinking about new ideas and willing to push yourself to grow. Thank you for joining us today, for being present, positive, and engaged. Let's practice the chat. So please take a minute to share what impact you hope today's webinar will have on your school's inclusionary practices. We will be able to reference this information later, and it will be useful for us in future planning. A friendly reminder that if you have questions, we'll be doing our best to monitor and respond in the Q&A on the bottom of your screen. So what are you hoping to hear about today that connects to your school's own journey? Seeing a lot of good ideas there. Master scheduling, ideas for differentiation, what this looks like in practice, possibilities for MTSS. Thank you, everyone. Shifting mindsets in school culture, so important. Awesome. So to start, here is a little background information about the Demonstration Sites project. In the fall of 2019, OSPI launched the Inclusionary Practices Professional Development Project. The Herring Center partnered with OSPI to coordinate and lead this part of the larger statewide project, creating model demonstration sites that highlight inclusionary practices across Washington State. The Demonstration Sites project was developed to provide educators from around the state with the opportunity to observe inclusionary practices in action, meet with school teams, collect artifacts that aid in systems change, and learn about how to implement inclusionary practices in different school contexts. Our demonstration sites highlight the diversity in our state. They include urban schools, rural schools, and schools in some of our largest and smallest districts across Washington. In collaboration with Herring Center inclusion specialists, the original intention and future intention of this project is for demonstration sites to host visiting schools to showcase high leverage inclusionary practices. By sharing these practices and opening their doors to teachers, administrators, families, and community members, it allows visitors to see best practices in action and apply them in their schools. At the same time, the demonstration sites themselves continue to grow their inclusive cultures and refine their practices that contribute to equitable learning for all students. Clearly, right now, we have some constraints around literally opening our doors, but have been doing our best to pivot to continue to provide transformational learning using virtual platforms. And this is how you will hear today about Mark Twain's inclusive education journey. There are some founding principles that drive our model demonstration sites work. To start, in every school, there are things that are working well. In education, we have the tendency to examine the problems associated with our practices instead of examining what's working well, why it's working well, and how we can use that information to make things better. This asset-based approach is a productive way for schools to leverage their strengths to become more inclusive. Also, inclusion is not a special education initiative, but is a cultural shift in philosophy and practice. If we simply change the way we deliver special education services without considering the culture of the school or how all students engage in teaching and learning, we will never make the changes we need to truly impact student learning. Through the course of our webinars and by way of scheduling virtual visits, district schools and communities can learn more about what steps are taken to make these shifts to a more inclusive school. This includes learning about instructional strategies, systems, and structures allow for more inclusive learning communities, the impetus for why schools begin making these changes, how they engage stakeholders, the district, and other strategic moves they've made along the way to facilitate lasting and sustainable change. Mark Twain will share much of this with you today. What is exciting about the demonstration sites is they're in various stages of the journey. And whether they're in year one of their journey or if they are 6 years in, they all have plans for continuous improvement. They recognize that as new students enter their buildings or join virtually, and as they collect more information about the best ways students learn, that their professional practices need to reflect that learning in responsive and meaningful ways. We developed this project because we experienced the impact on visiting schools of seeing inclusionary practices in action. The feelings, the dynamics, it was such an effective way for visiting schools to get why this works so well. And we experienced the impact on our demonstration sites by hosting visiting schools. Going virtual, just like for districts across the state, has encouraged us to develop new innovations, make some mistakes and learn, and to engage in true reflective practice. We are adapting and growing in response to what we have learned, and these experiences inform us as we move forward. But for today, in just a minute, we are very happy to highlight the work at one of our second cohort of demonstration sites, Mark Twain Elementary in Kirkland, Washington. Before we hand it over to Mark Twain, let's do some polling to see who is joining us today. Awesome. So we have excuse me, administrators, teachers here. We have parents, district leaders, specialists. Excuse me, hold on. Wonderful. So a great variety of people here to learn with us today. So I am now going to turn it over to the principal of Mark Twain, Craig Mott, to continue sharing with us about their journey as an inclusive school.
All right, great. Thanks, Naomi, for that introduction and for having the Mark Twain team here. As we switch over control, I want to welcome everybody for joining us. It's obviously been an interesting week with presenting the day after an election, but we're excited to be here to share our story. I am Craig Mott, principal at Mark Twain Elementary. This is my starting my ninth year as principal here. But I'd like to start off first to introduce our team of panelists who will be sharing in our journey and who've been a part of our journey from the get-go. And I'll start with Malia Goodfellow, who's our associate principal. We have Jessica Hughes, who is a paraeducator. Jamie Chappell, who's a third grade teacher. Meredith McDonough is first grade, and she's helping with technology and navigating our presentation today. We have Alicia Poling, who's a special education teacher. Lauren Hayes, who's a special education teacher. Bridget Middaugh, who's a special education teacher. We have 2 intervention teachers that are on our team, Amy Lanham and Julie Thomas. Both provide safety net, which is in our school district reading support. And we have Dinah Carew Olsen, who is a parent partner in our journey. Mark Twain is one of 29 elementary schools in the Lake Washington School District. We are one of the larger elementary schools. Our original school opened in 1962. The current building we are in was rebuilt and opened in 2000. And as we navigate our current pandemic, we are going through a remodel because of our ongoing growth that we're experiencing in this part of the school district. We're a community school, and by community, we are the hub of events that happen. Our families, our students, our staff celebrate the activities that go on in our community. We tend to have a huge outpouring of support from our families and our students, and typically events that we host have families and participation or attendance in 400 plus people at those events. We also have an active PTSA and a great partnership, which helps facilitate some of the work we're doing, not only with inclusion, but also supporting our students and families that are enrolled in our school. As you can see, our enrollment continues to grow, steady growth. Thus, we have a remodel happening. Our diversity has some small changes in different areas. It fluctuates. We are represented by 36 different languages in our building. We have an active equity team along with our inclusion team to help navigate the academic struggles with our marginalized populations, and we're in the learning phases with that piece of it. In terms of our academic performance, we continue to see positive trends with 81% of our students meeting standard on the ELA, SBA, along with 71% in math and 81% in science. So strong performance, but we also know we have a ways to go in improving all of those areas.
Today, we will be highlighting the following inclusionary practices: master schedule, flexible service model, and accessing core. When we look at why we started looking at these practices at Twain, these quotes from various teachers speak to what we were looking for. So from Fardosa Salad, a 4th grade teacher at Twain: "We teach all kids, not most. Each child deserves access to the best education we can give them in our gen ed classes. Being separated from their peers narrates to them that they can't be in our classes, that they can't learn there, which is not true." Alicia Poling, special education teacher: "Equal opportunity is a human right in the public school system, and morally it is the right thing to do." Katie Frakes, a 1st grade teacher: "All students can and will learn if they are given the tools and opportunities to do so. It is a teacher's duty and responsibility to be creative and figure out how to make learning accessible to all students." And Dinah Carew Olsen, a parent: "After graduation, disabled students will go on to live their lives in the world we all inhabit. Education isn't simply practice for that, but a meaningful way to participate in life and the world as it is." So as we started looking at practices at Twain, we realized that our why, as you can see here, was not aligning with our practices. And so we set out on a journey to fix that. As we started down that journey, we had some priorities for change. First, we were wanting to address institutional directionality, meaning typically we looked at meeting in the middle, students in the middle, and we often have categories we put students in, whether it's in this district, a resource room student or a learning center student. And so we had these ways that we were categorizing students. We found that we needed to work on presuming competence instead of observing deficits in students. We also needed to lean into discomfort. This conversation, as well as equity and social justice conversations, are hard, and we needed to start having those conversations in our building. We also needed to look at our parent partnerships. While we often always say that we are partners with families and the family is the expert on the child, we really wanted to make sure we were not just saying it, but also living it.
Good afternoon. I'm Julie Thomas, and I'm a safety net teacher at Mark Twain. And as Craig mentioned, safety net is our district term for intervention. So we're intervention teachers. The history of inclusion in Lake Washington is like a lot of other things in education, always shifting. I've been at Mark Twain for a really long time, so I've been around to see a lot of the changes that have occurred. Prior to 1992, we had regional learning centers, and then these were disbanded and students were sent to their home schools with the idea that they would be placed full-time in gen ed classrooms. And that happened, but one problem was that the supports were built on individual kids and responsibility fell on the home school to make it work. There wasn't really a district-wide safety net or support system in place. So as a second grade teacher with a nonverbal student in my class and no para support at the time, I was designing learning activities for him and lying awake at night thinking about how to best meet his needs along with the other 27 kids that I was responsible for. And when I asked how to make it all work, I was told that inclusion for him really meant social interaction and that academic goals were secondary. Around 2007, the district went back to learning centers, and at the beginning for Twain, this meant that kids were included for specialists and really highly engaging activities. What we've learned along the way is that we want all of our kids accessing core and learning the same content. District-wide inclusion still is a little dependent upon school culture and individual buildings and being creative with resources that are provided by the district. But at Twain, this means that core instruction for all our students and scaffolded supports to meet their individual needs.
Craig, you're muted.
Thank you. Sorry. This is year 5, the start of year 5 of our journey. And I think it's really important to highlight to everybody that this has not been a linear road trip for us. We've had lots of detours along the way, taking lots of learning from different events as well that have occurred in isolation as well as simultaneously with the other events happening. And we've learned from those processes. And what we want to be able to highlight today in our presentation is it wasn't one just main event that changed our mind and created our journey. It was a number of different pieces.
So Meredith, do you mind going back one slide? Perfect. So as we started to look at our pathways, we looked at laying the groundwork, and we were in about year 3 of having a district program at Twain. And we had just brought the program back to Twain. It's what we call a learning center, which is our students that are in 0 to 39% typically LRE. And least restrictive environment. And what we really needed to do was bring the program to Twain to break down the walls for those students, which seems a little bit backwards, but we wanted to get the kids on campus so that we could start to break down those barriers. We started to break down barriers in special education. So instead of looking at how a student might be categorically served in their IEP, are there other ways that we could serve them amongst all of the teachers that we had at Twain? And we were also beginning several district initiatives that included restorative practices, PBIS, equity, and the achievement gap, which all aligned with where we were going with inclusion. as we laid the groundwork, we learned a couple things after that year. The first was we were trying to do it reverse inclusion. And while we had great intentions about that, we realized that it didn't meet our vision of having students fully included in our school and our community. So we started to relook at that. We also continue to look at inclusion versus integration. Our students in class accessing core as a priority versus a student being in class for maybe social reasons or for a party. We also wanted to shift as we had different models going at Twain at that time. So as you look at that roadmap that we had several roads going that eventually converged together. One was the district program that we had. Another road was the resource room students that we had. And then as you'll learn, we also had Aune, a student that you'll learn about today, who was also on her own path. We also started to transition this year to focusing on the barriers between gen ed and special ed. So while we spent this last year focusing on breaking down walls in special ed, we wanted to start bringing that out to gen ed and special ed as well.
So as we were doing the work at Twain, we also started to see a cultural shift within the Lake Washington School District. As a district, we were starting to focus on MTSS/inclusion committee work. And within those committees, we started to see a divergence of school pilots that were happening. Focused areas included PBIS. There was a group working on SWIFT. We had another working on co-teaching, and we at Twain and our small group at that time were still committed to going down the inclusion pathway. Because we were focused on that area, we also had the opportunity to do some site visits around the state of Washington as well as Oregon. We got to benefit from going to see another demonstration site in McMicken. We also had the opportunity to go down to the Portland area to see Westland, Wilsonville School District and look at what they were doing in the area of inclusion and start to leverage ideas from both of those to start to make our own. At the building level, we started to hear our students using their voices and saying they did not want to be pulled out. And rather than just hearing what they were saying, we started to listen to what they were saying because they were becoming very passionate about the fact that they did not want to be pulled from their gen ed classes with their teachers. We were also hearing from our staff that were concerned about the number of times kids were being pulled for intervention services, whether it was safety net, whether it was ELL, or whether it was actually a SPED service model. And so what we started to do at an intervention level was start to have conversations about what does this look like at Mark Twain, and is there a way that we're able to better serve our students and meet the needs of everybody in our building? As with all large or all school districts for that matter, we know there's tons of initiatives that are put forth at the beginning of the year. And although we were trying to conceptualize this whole idea about inclusion and pulling these ideas from the different sites we went to visit, we also knew we had to balance the work of the district. And our staff started to ask us, how does this fit in with all these initiatives? And so what we tried to do is conceptualize these in a model that made sense to everybody. It was our first attempt to really streamline everything and how they all interconnected with everything that we were trying to do. Based on those high leverage moves, we had ongoing reflection that was happening. Part of what we were working towards was shifting mindsets, but along the way, we got caught up in our own desire to get kids included so much that we actually started creating new barriers because we started to define how kids were to go be included in the classrooms. And so we were looking at a group of kids and saying, oh, they could be going in there for routines, or some could be going in there for friendship opportunities, or beginning or end activities, or maybe specialists. And we started to think about it and go, wait a minute, we're not creating an inclusive environment at all. What we were trying to do was define it, and it was actually creating more barriers. The other piece of it too was we had to address staff concerns. Staff were concerned because they didn't feel like they were experts in this area. They saw special ed teachers as the experts, or the intervention teachers as the experts. And so we had to be mindful that we had to bring staff on board. And so what we really focused on was an interest approach. What were the interests we were hearing from them? And those interests included, they wanted less pullout. They wanted kids in their classrooms so that they could actually and authentically know where they were. The other piece of it we started to hear was common planning. We hadn't had common planning up to that point. We'd had in Lake Washington Wednesday afternoon opportunities to meet as teams, but there was also other structured events that tended to happen. And then finally, we also heard that we needed more SEL support. And so as we approached this work, we took those interests and we started to develop systems so that we can answer those. So what we ended up doing as part of that ongoing reflection was making sure that inclusion meant it was part of meaningful learning and a contributing member of the classroom. We wanted to engage kids in the learning piece versus just managing behavior. We didn't want to put kids in the class who were behaviorally okay, can handle sitting there, but couldn't engage in the core academics. And so that was part of our definition associated with it. We also recognize that inclusion requires a lot of collaboration and deprivatization of our practice. We were requiring teachers to open their doors to a number of different people to come in to provide supports. And finally, we also realized that we also needed tons of PD, and UDL was needed for our staff in order to do this meaningful. The other piece of it that we needed to, or that we recognize, is we needed to be creative with our staffing model. If you continue to do what we had done to that point, we wouldn't have been able to do it. And so we started to look at different ways to leverage the people that we had in our building and use them in a way that could help create inclusion and meaningful opportunities. And then the last piece of it, we had to involve all intervention teachers, not just those that were serving students on IEPs.
My name is Amy Lanham, and I and my teammate Julie Thomas and I are part of our Safety Net team at Mark Twain. Again, Safety Net teachers are what our district calls intervention teachers. When power groups were initiated last year, our administrators made sure that each of our Safety Net teacher, our special ed teacher, our EL teachers that were on a grade level team to help with planning. So whether we liked it or not, and if we were comfortable with it or not, this put a lot of us in more of a leadership role to help keep our meetings and our grade levels open so that all of us could plan and discuss students together. So it put us in a totally new role, like I said, whether we liked it or not.
So as intervention teachers, we know that the heart of MTSS is core instruction. Solid, differentiated core is the primary intervention for kids. Our team really struggled with scheduling. We had to schedule groups around recesses, lunches, specialists, and in a big school like Twain, it meant that we sometimes had to pull our kids from core to fit all of our intervention groups in, and so did special ed and EL. Aside from the fact that it went against what we felt was best for kids, it also made it really, really difficult to close learning gaps for our kids when they were missing out on the great core instruction that their peers were receiving. Another problem was that we were seen as the reading teachers by our colleagues and our students rather than tier 2 teachers. Power groups have really helped to alleviate these issues. All of our students are receiving core, and we're providing the plus more interventions that our safety net kids need to be successful. It also has really helped to remove the stigma for kids about having to leave to go to their reading group or hearing someone say, it's time to go work with your reading teacher. And I knew that last year when I passed one of my first graders in the hall and I heard him say to his friends, that's my power group teacher. That we are definitely on the right path for our kids. And our belief that every student should have access to core is ongoing. It's sometimes messy, but we're continually working toward engagement in core for all of our kids.
And along with that core instruction, as intervention teachers in our position, we look at data a lot, and in fact, that's actually how we identify our students. So we've always been looking at kids' reading data especially, and trying to see who we serve. But through this process, it really became imperative that our school as a whole needed to start to look at data more, and all the data of all of our students. Not everyone on our staff had done that before, but it became apparent that we needed a really good universal screener. And fortunately, this year, our district has just adopted a K-8 reading and math screener. So we're all in the process of learning how to use that screener to assess and consistently progress monitor all of our students, so that everyone's instruction is being informed. With that way, we can meet our students' needs in smaller groups and classes during our power group time.
Hi, I'm Bridget Middaugh, and I'm a special education teacher at Twain. And my previous teaching role was in the Learning Center, and I'm now an interventions classroom teacher. In Lake Washington, our emotional behavior rooms are actually called intervention classrooms. 3 high leverage moves we made to increase collaboration with the general education teachers are: the Learning Center teachers had a voice on the team. We became members of grade level teams. We were able to give a different perspective to advocate and create access points for our students. This helped create authentic opportunities for our students and allowed us to broaden the opportunity without changing the bar. Communication plans and time to plan together. This was frequent check-ins, scheduled planning sessions, and open communication and planning with students in mind. We have a consistent feedback loop with parents, gen ed teachers, and related services. Materials were ready for students. At first, this is something I did. And then as the school year moves on, the general education teacher and teachers start to create the materials for themselves. This is not an all-encompassing list. We continue to shift and change to best fit the needs of our students.
So as part of our work, like I said, we were reflecting as we were going, we were building a collective expertise. We needed to now put the plan into action. So what we ended up doing was developing a master schedule to reflect those interests that we heard from staff, but also the interest of what we wanted to achieve as an inclusive school. We developed a master schedule with common planning. For our intermediate grades, we built in common planning every day with the exception on Wednesdays, and it was a long 60-minute non-interrupted amount of time. We actually built in social emotional learning as a specialist for those upper grade levels. It was a little more challenging for our younger grades, and so we tried to build it around recesses or other specialist times. But it still wasn't what we'd really hoped for initially, but it still met the criteria of what we wanted for common planning. You heard Amy talk about power groups. Power groups were an intervention period in reading and math that were designed for all students. It wasn't just intervention students, it was all students. And so all students accessed their core instruction with their gen ed teacher. And then we had flexible service models developed in reading and math for our kids to travel based on what the data was telling us. And so a student could actually be receiving challenge if they needed challenge. You could have kids receiving reteach. You could have ELL students getting ELL services, or safety net could be supporting a special needs student based off that data. What it allowed us to do was move every student throughout the building without stigma, but also to provide meaningful intervention or support along the way. The other piece of it is that we developed access points to align with the general education instruction. We needed to be able to create points where kids could access the instruction at their level. As you heard Bridget say, we weren't changing the standard of the bar, we were broadening the opportunity for those kids to access those things in the gen ed classroom. The last piece, and it was something that we hadn't realized at the time, but Lake Washington then became part of a partnership with the Tye Center at the University of Minnesota. And we were fortunate to be chosen to also help work with them, providing technical assistance to our most significant cognitive impacted kids. And so we're working with them right now to create entry points and meaningful inclusions for all of our students in our building. The other piece that we realized that was equally as important as all the other stuff was the multidisciplinary teams. We created grade level teams that involved everybody. And so you had your gen ed teachers along with an assigned ELL teacher, a safety teacher, and a SPED teacher. And they were all there to provide input on what were some best practices so that kids could access core, whether it was leveled readers, whether it was components of UDL, so that kids could demonstrate understanding of material that was maybe different than what was initially expected. What we did figure out along the way, though, is we needed a protocol. And so if you'll go to our artifacts at the end of the presentation, we've included examples of the master schedule we did last year versus this year. But we also have included a new protocol that we plan to use moving forward, which is based on the 4 critical questions of PLCs with a UDL lens to the 4 critical questions.
So as we look at this year and beyond and our scaling up, this year, we'll speak to a little bit later, we had to develop a master schedule that reflected our beliefs in an online learning platform. We this year have Common Planning K-5. We are utilizing FastBridge as our common assessment that Amy mentioned for reading and math. We also added the intervention program, as Bridget mentioned. So now we have the ability to have all Twain students at Twain. And we continue our partnership with TIES and the Herring Center. TIES looking, as Craig mentioned, at the 3% of students currently at Twain that are not accessing core instruction, and how can we find ways to get all students into core at Twain. We're continuing with UDL PD this year as a focal point. We've started protocols for team conversations around UDL procedures. You'll see that in our artifacts. And we also are continuing to work on access points for differentiation, which you will also see an example from 3rd grade in our artifacts.
So the journey hasn't ended. It's actually probably just beginning now that we are better understanding our own learning, as well as really looking towards the future. But we also want to acknowledge the journey looks different from everybody at Twain. And we want to share some of those perspectives because they're important and we continue to learn from everyone's voice. And so for the next little bit, you're going to hear from the different stakeholders that are part of this process and who have given us feedback and who have actively been working both collaboratively, but also with students to make this a meaningful, inclusive opportunity for kids. So I'd first like to introduce Dinah Karul Olsen, whose daughter Aune has been with us since kindergartner. She's currently a 3rd grader. And Aune has been in full inclusion at Mark Twain since she started, and she receives all related services as well in a push-in model.
Right. Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here today. As Craig said, my name is Dinah Karul Olsen, and I am that parent. Language note, I use identity first language intentionally in line with the disability communities that our family learns from. So I will say disabled. I don't know how many of you know this, but when you give birth to a disabled child, the world is really good at telling you just what that child cannot do. There's this really narrow path already charted, and you are quickly made aware of all of your kid's deficits and exactly where that kid is headed. There's also this strange urgency to get the kid fixed or at least remediated. There are several systems that will try to convince you that your child fitting in is paramount. So when this happened to us, I kept looking at Aune, my tiny perfect baby, and I just could not see or imagine it. Just that one future, the supposed deficits in need of repair. The only thing that I could clearly imagine was that her future was totally open, much like for non-disabled kids. And I soon realized that that prescribed future was not only wrong for her, but it was wrong for all kids. Luckily for us, we had all of the research on our side. As long ago as in 1945, think about that. A panel at the Council for Exceptional Children Convention recommended inclusive education for intellectually disabled children. Already in the 1960s, a host of studies showed that there was nothing to be gained from segregated special education. So today, when we talk of 40 years of compelling evidence that shows that inclusive education is the way to educate all students, we actually rest on at least 75 years of understanding that disabled students' futures are just as open and full of promise as non-disabled students' futures are, as long as we put the opportunity in front of ability and not the other way around. We came to the US when Auna was a year old, and we spent some time in 0 to 3 services in preschool doing what I affectionately call bending the system and the world to what we saw as the best fit for her and what we knew was the best for all kids. So what this looked like was that we welcomed supports and that played off of Auna's strengths and that encouraged and supported her negotiation of, engagement with, and her curiosity of all of the environments that non-disabled children inhabit. We managed and we built a community of like-minded families. And then in 2017, we got to Twain, and I have to do the sound effect. Dun, dun, dun. What hadn't been easy before now seemed practically impossible. I will not lie, it was rough. In the beginning, it was really difficult for me to see the very real good intentions behind the long established ways of educating disabled students. And I think it was really tough for the school to understand that our vision wasn't just something different or extra that we had decided on a whim that Auna should have. That in the beginning, that I in the IEP, as much as it helped us and as necessary as it is, it also tripped us up. However, with the help of Cassie Martin, it was wonderful to learn that no one needed to reinvent the wheel, that the knowledge of the how of meaningfully inclusive education was there for the taking. We knew that supports and services were portable and that Auna could absolutely spend all of her day in school in a general education classroom, be in community with and learn right alongside her non-disabled classmates. So she did and continues to do. There are many things that have had to come together for Auna to be as successful as she is. This includes things like learning about and then implementing universal design for learning with fidelity, the general educator embracing their role as the instructional leader in the classroom for all students, a shift in focus from service minutes and compliance to identifying and meeting real support, access, and facilitation needs, and having high but also broad expectations. So there's no implicit requirement to fit in general education. But most of all, what I think has been a game changer is Twain walking their talk on collaborating with me, the parent. It's amazing how much change going from being talked at the IEP meeting to contributing as an expert on Auna's everyday life and her future can create. Now we're in the fourth year at Twain, and it's still a balancing act every day to be like the right amount of involved as a parent in my own child's education, while also working towards system change at the school, district, and state level to help ensure that the doors that open for Auna stay open for others. So the journey has been rocky, it still is, but ultimately, I think the difficulty doesn't lie in implementing one more thing, but consistently reflecting on and shifting our shared understanding of disability, of community, of collaboration, and even of education. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. My name is Lauren Hayes, and I'm one of the special education teachers at Mark Twain, specifically a resource room teacher. So when talking about our journey throughout this process, one point that we special education teachers discussed is how we have seen firsthand how inclusionary and non-inclusionary practices can have an effect on the well-being of students. My personal journey started, my first year of teaching, and I'll never forget, it was like in the first month, my first year, not at this school. I had a general education teacher introduce me to her class because I was new to the school. And she introduced me as the special education teacher. And then she called out 3 students specifically in front of the entire class and said that they would work with me. Now, I know that teacher did not mean any harm by doing that, but I immediately felt some discomfort, and I looked at those 3 students that were called out, and I could see the discomfort on their faces and within their body language. That was really, I think, when I first witnessed the effect on a student's well-being and self-image that non-inclusionary and practices can have on students. So now going to Twain, before we put power groups into place, every year, pretty much every year, I've had students come to me crying or complaining, saying that they feel bad about themselves because they've had to go to my classroom, or saying that they felt they weren't picking things up as quickly as their peers, or telling me that they've been made fun of again for having to go to my classroom, which as a teacher just really broke my heart. Before power groups, we've also had students telling us, and like Craig mentioned before, that they refuse to go to group because they don't want to look different from their peers and they want to do what the class is doing. So I know that really took that student voice to heart, and that made a lot of us think, and it really made me think. I started to think, these kids, they come to school believing in themselves, yet receiving special education services with non-inclusionary practices, the way we were doing things, somehow teaching them that they aren't good enough to learn with the rest of their peers. And this really just shouldn't be the case at all. And that thought is what's really fueled me with my journey and continue to fuels me to look at how we at our school can improve our inclusionary practices. So I am happy to report that since we started power groups, I don't think I've had any kid come to me anymore saying that, or sharing the concerns that I mentioned earlier, or saying that they're feeling down about themselves because they have to go to power group. We still have a lot of work to do at our school to make all of our groups inclusionary, and I personally also have more work to do myself. But it really is exciting to see how far we've come and to see the effect that it's had on our students. So I was fortunate enough to be able to reach out to some of our current and previous students so that we could get student perspective about our journey with power groups. And one student whose self-confidence and attitude towards school has really improved since starting power groups is Calvin. Calvin has been with us before and during the implementation of power groups. And so let's watch and listen to what he had to say about them.
Meredith, I think you have to unmute yourself for the rest of the folks to hear it.
I'm in the 5th grade.
Yeah, at Mark Twain Elementary, right?
Yep.
Awesome. Okay, thanks, Calvin, for being here to answer some questions with us. So my first question is, how do you like power groups so far? Like, I know it's been a little bit different with the remote learning, but when you think about in person, how do you like the power groups?
I'm good. I wish I could just stay in the class, and also have to help with the small groups.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess
Go ahead.
now it's going to be good.
Yeah. So Calvin, that makes me think then back to third grade. So third grade was when we didn't have power groups yet. And you had to go to, that's when Mrs. Pulling and I were in the portable next to your portable, and you had to go to our room for some groups. And I know at one point you said you didn't want to go to group anymore, right?
Yeah.
Which is totally fine. Will you tell me about your feelings, like why you didn't want to go to group?
I just wanted to stay with my friends and just talk with them. Even though I didn't want to go, but I know it was the good thing to do. I just wish I could just stay with my friends.
Yeah, you wanted to stay with your friends? Okay, I totally understand that. And was there a change? Because in second grade, you were okay going to group, but then in third grade, you didn't. What was the change, do you think?
I think I just wanted a little more oomph and just like have a little more time with both classes equal.
Yeah, I understand that. Did you feel okay about going to, like, did you feel okay about yourself going to group?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. So that brings me to my next question then. How would you feel when you got back to class? Like when you say you came back into class and sometimes your teacher would be in the middle of a lesson. How would you feel when that happened?
I'd be a little confused, but I would just tell myself, okay, just ask one of your friends to see what's happening. And
Okay.
since I knew what was happening, but I didn't know what to do.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's kind of difficult because you're coming back to a class where they've already started something, and even though someone can tell you what they're doing, you maybe miss some of the directions. Were your teachers always able to catch you up, or was sometimes that maybe they were busy, it was too difficult?
It usually got me up to date.
Okay, good. Usually the teachers would.
It's a little crowded.
Yeah, sometimes it gets busy in the class.
Mhm.
Okay, so then you moved on to fourth grade, and fourth grade last year is when we introduced the power groups. And so with the power groups, all students went to a reading group at the same time, all students went to a math group at the same time, and you weren't really missing anything from class because everyone's going to a group. So I noticed you easily went to group. You didn't hesitate, you weren't upset about it. How come you were okay to go to power groups?
It just felt more right. It's just like, okay, I can see. It gets me to know what the class is fully doing. Gives me all the directions that I can go to the power group and do the stuff there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, great. I'm glad that you feel better about them. But I want to ask another question about writing group. So writing group, as you know, we have not made that into a power group yet. That is still a group that you were coming to, you were leaving class and you were going to group with me last year for writing.
Yep.
How did you feel about that group? And you can be honest. Did you like going to leaving class? How did you feel?
It was nice. I got to know you and some other students.
Mm-hmm. And how did you feel leaving the class? Were you okay leaving the class for writing?
Yeah, it's just like, at least I have the other ones that's not this new way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it made you feel better because you had other ones that were the same, or that were power groups. So it didn't make it feel like you had so many that you had to leave class for.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. That's good to know. Okay, I got one more question for you then. So with power groups And with thinking about how like writing group, we still don't do power groups. Remember you had social group with me for a little bit too, and we don't have a power group for social group. Do you think there's anything our school could do?
I guess they could just, like, I don't know, just like make that into a power group. If they can't, I would at least like just have the social group that have it, or the rating, just one of them.
One or the other.
Yeah. Or both could be even better.
Okay. So, but overall, you like the power groups better because you don't feel like you're missing much from class. And if we had the choice, you like, if you still had social and you had writing, you would rather combine them instead of having extra groups to go to, right?
Yeah, because you can get your writing done, a little writing with the other one. That could help with time issues too.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that makes a lot of sense. Well, Calvin, thank you for answering the questions for me.
You're welcome.
Hi, everybody. That was such a cute video. I adore Calvin so much, and I love working with Miss Hayes. We share a classroom in the class back when we were in the classroom. But so that was that's a wonderful video to share. So I'm glad I get to follow up after that. My name is Alicia Poling, and I'm a special education teacher in the resource room here at Mark Twain. I am also the 504 monitor. One thing I just wanted to share was my first principal. His name was Mr. Witten, and he used to wear a shirt that said, "I failed first grade 2 times and I'm your principal." And I often think about that shirt as it really highlights the fact that we cannot and should not predict outcomes for students. We should not focus on their disabilities, rather we should focus on their abilities. Early in my teaching career, I had the fortunate experience of working with 2 amazing special ed teachers early in my career who taught me how to advocate fiercely for students, and for that I'm grateful. And over the past 3 years, I've met some more amazing new people who have expanded my views of special education, a parent, Dinah, and an inclusion specialist, Cassie. So 3 years ago when Aune started, I was stunned when her parents requested her to be included 100% of her school day. From past experiences, I had heard of full inclusion, but I was skeptical it could be done. And I did not think it was the best way for her to learn, since I was used to pulling kids in small groups for specialized instruction. At one point, I flat out said, "This is ludicrous." Fortunately, I did not say that in front of Dinah, but I didn't have to. I'm pretty sure she knew my stance on the whole situation through my constant pushback and "I know better than you" attitude. So to say we weren't besties is an understatement. Luckily, a lot has changed since then with Cassie's guidance and my doing more listening than talking. I started to realize that full inclusion is not only possible, but it is what's best for all students. And most of the time, it simply involves shifting resources as opposed to asking for more resources. With the right leadership in place, collaboration among teachers, and parent involvement, it can and does work. So one main thing to remember is that the goal of special education is not to fix the student, but rather to fix the environment. In other words, all teachers should work to create a ramp so that all kids can access the learning that's occurring inside the classroom. Furthermore, the goal for all students should be academic progress and participation in meaningful learning activities alongside their peers. To do this, we must presume competence and give them a home in the classroom rather than a cot for when they are visiting. Moreover, we should never gatekeep any tools that promote learning. So at Twain, our gen ed teachers are highly skilled and can provide SDI to students in gen ed classrooms by implementing UDL. In fact, our gen ed teachers are experts in the content areas that they teach, so it makes sense that they would be the best ones to deliver the quality instruction to students. SPED teachers can help them be successful by providing insight on the supports needed materials, instructional design decisions. Sometimes paras are needed to provide supplemental supports and services, but often SDI can be delivered by anyone on the child's IEP team. So having a team of people to provide portable services to students increases the amount of time spent engaging in classroom activities, which improves academic and social outcomes. And even better, the gen ed curriculum can typically and usually meet the needs of most students, which kind of makes replacement curriculum unnecessary. So 4 things that I just want to highlight that provide inclusive opportunities is, of course, UDL. UDL is the Universal Design for Learning and provides a map of kind of creating varied lesson plans and opportunities for all students to engage in meaningful learning. 3 principles of UDL is the planning of multiple means of presentation, multiple ways to experience the content, and multiple ways to demonstrate knowledge. The main difference between, because I had a hard time understanding initially, like what the difference between UDL and traditional differentiated instruction is that UDL occurs in the planning stage versus on the fly. So careful planning using UDL can meet the needs of all students, and it's critical to making meaningful inclusion work. Multiple means of presentation. That could look like text read aloud, teacher reading information aloud, presenting information using videos, use of pictures, graphs, gestures, symbols, and large text amplified sounds. Multiple ways to experience the content is movement, tactile learning experiences, especially for little ones, those kinesthetic learners, using various tools to complete assignments that are modified or enhanced, engaging in skits, readers' workshops to synthesize information, graphing information, graphic organizers to display organized information, multiple means of demonstrating knowledge. So that means like allowing kids to create videos to explain their learning rather than just standard assessments. But if those work for some kids, those are possible too. Drawing pictures to explain concepts, giving answers orally on assessments. And then creating ramps, so making sure, and Julie had kind of talked about this earlier, just making sure when you have a student in the classroom, what can we do to make them be able to access the learning that's already occurring? Like what supports and accommodations can we have in place to create those access points and meaningful engagement? And then progress monitoring, that's just best practice is to use a tool. We have a great tool this year, FastBridge for reading and math. So use a tool to gather baseline data and then use that same tool to progress monitor periodically. That way we can know what skill level they're at. We can create power groups. We can move kids between power groups as they make progress, which promotes continuous rigor and growth. So that's also key as well. And then this change as case managers being inclusion facilitators. I like that term, inclusion facilitators, since SPED is a service, not a place. So case managers, which oftentimes include SPED teachers, EL teachers, 504 monitors, SLPs, OTs, they can provide activities, instructions on how to embed opportunities and instruction, especially designed to target certain skills and encourage academic growth in the gen ed room. So kind of coach and provide those activities to the gen ed teachers. And then examples would be providing teachers with adapted materials like framed paragraphs, graphs, simplified text, sentence starters, word banks, visual aids, coaching them on methodology, so teaching teachers how to teach kids how to use the assistive tech piece, or providing kinesthetic opportunities for learning and teaching strategies to encourage language acquisition. For example, our EL teacher is a big supporter of using gestures. So she's a great resource to teach those types of things for gen ed teachers. And then adapting instruction. So having small groups in the classroom to reteach lessons so that kids don't necessarily have to leave to get a double dip. And then embedding reading instruction in the curriculum, embedded opportunities to target speech goals in writing or math goals in science, just really thinking outside the box on how to provide multiple opportunities for kids to learn in the gen ed classroom.
Hi, I'm Jessica Hughes. I'm a paraeducator at Mark Twain, and I have had the fortune of being Aune's para for the last 3+ years. Excuse me, I will be reading my part. Craig, my principal, called me during the summer of 2017 and told me that we had a student starting, that it was a bit complicated, that if I agreed to do it, I'd be in a gen ed classroom full-time with a little girl who was entering kindergarten. I said yes. I'd been in the Learning Center for a few years at that point and was suddenly in a general education class with a child with a significant disability. It was obvious to me that everything I thought I knew about my job was going to have to be tossed. I soon learned that there were very high expectations of me, that there was a lot that came with my new role. No one knew what they were doing, including and maybe especially me. And one thing that became clear right away was that as a staff, we were not all on board with the idea of full inclusion. Saying that it was hard is an understatement. What I did have was this amazingly bright, fun, social, and engaging little girl and a gen ed teacher who wanted the two of us in there. I counted those as wins. In the beginning, I kept asking for help that just was not there. I learned quickly that inclusion doesn't just mean presence in a room. Cassie Martin came regularly, and it was hard to know and to admit that I often had no idea what I was doing. By mid-October of that first year, I realized I was on my own and our little boat was going to sink if I didn't put my big girl pants on, stop waiting for things to change, and change myself. I needed to change my attitude and way of thinking. I needed to make it work. Every time Cassie came, I'd say, show me, and watch her sit down in my place and effortlessly do what I didn't know how to do, and I tried to learn. While I understood the concept, I hadn't really understood what making the work engaging looked like, and I tried to soak up every bit of knowledge that was provided during those visits. I had to reinvent my job as I knew it. In my previous para life, I had learned to get what was wanted out of a student by offering treats or iPad games as reinforcers. And now I needed to figure out how to make my own enthusiasm, our environment, the things coming up in our day, and the work itself reinforcing. I found that these things actually work and work well. They just take more effort. I had people observing us on a regular basis and had to figure out how to pretend they weren't there and to just do my job. There were moments, and lots of them, of real contention. I felt like I wore so many hats, many of which weren't mine and didn't fit me, but I had to somehow adjust to them. I had the support of the gen ed teacher, and together we figured out how to make it work that first year. Meanwhile, as I was learning and growing, I was watching Aune learn and grow. I watched her grasp complicated concepts that were put to her, knowing that they would not have been on offer had she been in a contained setting. I saw them click with her and the light bulb go on when she got it. I watched her make real connections and true friendships with her peers. She was sought out as a playmate and a partner. I saw her watching what others were doing in and out of the classroom and wanting to do them too. She was thriving. With my own eyes, I was seeing firsthand and close up that being in a general education setting from the first day of kindergarten, learning the core content and being with her classmates full time was putting her on a path of real growth and success. The fact that it was early in her education just gave her that much more of an advantage. Aune was, is, and always will be a peer and not a project. This is now the 4th year that I've had the privilege of being Aune's one-on-one para, and we are working remotely to the best of our ability. It has been a bumpy, often frustrating, and also very joyful road. Being a para on this path has been interesting. I am not a part of the big picture, common planning, core content. It's just been my job to make it work in real time. I was thinking about how an inclusion para is like a Thneed from Dr. Seuss's The Lorax. Instead of being a hat, a scarf, a blanket, a carpet, we need to be all of the educator roles in one because we are always there. It is not for the faint of heart. I have been in 4 different teachers' classrooms and they have all been wonderful, vastly different in personality and teaching style. I have absolutely loved them all and have learned from each one. They have all been willing to accept me as a teammate and not an underling, which I'm sure is not easy, but in my position is so important. I love being with the kids and have tried to take on the challenge of adapting to our new classroom each year and finding ways to contribute and to make it meaningful for Aune. Each year, as the curriculum changes and becomes more difficult, it gets a little bit harder to do, and so I'm continually learning along with Aune. It's very hard work. It takes extreme patience and openness to learn. It takes the ability to admit that you're wrong. Sometimes it means saying that what you're doing is not working and being willing to scrap things you've worked really hard on to try something else that might work better. It takes a positive attitude even when those around you do not feel the same way. It takes a team and every member of the team doing their part. It takes being able to see big wins in small places. What I wasn't anticipating when I started this journey is that I might actually be the one to learn, grow, and change the most. Aune and her mom taught me that I'm smart, that I can do and learn hard things, and that absolutely anyone can when given the right environment and the proper supports. I watch Aune do hard things every day. I see the self-pride, I see her friends cheer her on, and I see her cheer right back. I've seen her peers see Aune for Aune as someone who can learn right alongside them. Our school climate has changed, and though we still have hard work to do and a long way to go, we are moving in the right direction. I'm thankful to be a part of that. We are working to be a better and fully inclusive educators with a better understanding, and we are trying to create a whole learning experience for the kids in our care. I don't think at the time we had any idea that we were all getting on a train, but I am thankful that Craig called me that day and asked me to get on board.
Hi, my name is Jamie Chappell and I'm a third grade teacher here at Twain. I began teaching here at Twain right after graduating from college and really only had a theoretical understanding of how to serve the needs of all of the students in my class. I soon observed that the roles of the general education and special education teacher were fairly separated, and there was little communication between the two about what each person was working on in their classroom and with our shared students. Over the next couple of years, students who typically spent all of their school days inside of our Learning Center classroom began to push into the general education classroom. This led to more collaboration between general education teachers and special education teachers about areas that we could both support students in. Throughout these years, I noticed a difference between students with disabilities who were pushing into the general education classroom and those who had always been fully included in the classroom. A student that I had a couple of years ago who has a disability began pushing into the classroom and loved the social aspect of coming to class. This student loved the new activities, opportunities, and friendships that they were able to make. At the same time, this student was not used to being around other third graders this often, and the third graders in class had really only interacted with the student for brief periods of time. We soon realized that we needed to have specific conversations with the students in class explaining how to be a friend and not a caretaker. Over time, we were able to shift student mindsets and genuine friendships were formed. As the school year continued, the special education teacher and I collaborated often about areas that we could bring this student into the general education classroom more, starting with social activities and then slowly leading into more academic areas. Fast forward 2 years, I now have a student with a disability who is and has always been fully included in the general education classroom, and it has been a very different experience. This student has spent their entire academic history among their peers and have already been accepted as a friend and a classmate without needing to have specific conversations. Unlike in previous years, collaboration with other professionals in the building is absolutely essential. We now have a daily check-ins and weekly meetings to ensure we're meeting the needs of every student in the classroom. This involves looking at the learning standards for upcoming lessons, identifying barriers that students may experience when trying to reach the standard, and then working together to plan different tiered approaches that will help all students access the standard. This requires time and hard work, but has benefited so many different individuals within our classroom and within our building.
So just when you didn't think this work would get any harder, entered the pandemic of 2020 and we had to pivot. Just when we were starting to get our feet and our momentum going, we all of a sudden had to go to an online model. And we had to do some deep reflective thought on how are we going to continue to be inclusive in a remote world where lessons are basically being presented and parents are learning a new platform, staffs are learning a new platform. And so we really had to brainstorm some new ideas. And so what we really went back to was the UDL principles and creating access points around engagement and representation to get kids the opportunity who already struggle to access an online platform. We had to build meaningful collaboration even more so. We were relying on each other and the adults to come together to create the ability to engage kids in learning. And we've learned a lot since the spring. As we continued into this year, we recognized that the most impacted kids were coming into our building, and we have kids in our building, but we weren't just bringing them into the building to receive just SDI requirements. We wanted them to be part of their classrooms. And so our kids are accessing core simultaneously with their classmates in an online model. It's not ideal. We're still learning on how to do it. As Dinah mentioned, we are partnering with parents to create meaningful opportunities and engaging in tough conversations. Again, intentional conversations on our grade level teams and involving everybody needs to be key. And it's going to have to continue as we move forward since we don't know what the journey looks like. So in terms of what we've learned along the way, we've learned a lot. We're still learning, but really you have to leverage and diversify your leadership. This is not a principal or an social assistant principals the only people doing the work here. You need to highlight and grab the expertise in your building and build capacity with those individuals. We need to be flexible. We need to find different ways to serve our students. And we take a mentality of anything's possible, so let's try it. We do use new language. We often come back to, is this an adult problem or a student problem? And lots of times it's just the adult problem and not the student problem. The other piece of it is we know kids need access to other groups. And so how do we go about doing that? We're not changing the bar, and that's very important to us. The standard is the standard, and we don't want to lower that bar, but we want to broaden the opportunity to give students the opportunity to access that in the general education classroom. We have to continue to have ongoing collaboration. This doesn't have to be district-wide to get started. It has to be district-wide to continue down the road. And so our district started the path, and we as a building have jumped on, as I'll use Jessica's reference to a train, and we are pledging forward to do what we need to do. But this can't be just our building, and we want to make sure that this expands beyond that. And so our work with the Herring Center and our work with the TIES group is helping to create that opportunity. And then the most important piece also I want to acknowledge is access point is not just inclusion. It goes back to being a community, and we want all of our students, all 658 of our students, to be in a general ed classroom and part of a community and engaging in core instruction. And we're getting close. We have a long ways to go, but we're really proud, and I'm really proud of the way our staff has tackled this to this point. And finally, I just want to acknowledge there's no one way to do this. There's lots of schools out there that are doing great work. I think we're one of them. We are learning from each other. We're learning from our colleagues that are also demonstration site. But I want to be really clear that this is hard, and this is on the forefront of our minds every day. But when you see students come into the school and they have a smile on their face and they have an authentic friendship, or they're being successful, or they're seen as a leader, or in some cases, we have had kids invited to play dates that have never been invited to play dates. And you see the smile on the parent's face and the student's face, the work is all well worth it. In terms of artifacts and resources, we've hooked up a couple of them here for people to see. It includes our master schedule that we put into play last year. We've also created a online learning master schedule that we've been utilizing this year. We've also included a brand new UDL team planning document that teams will use that, as I mentioned before, look at the 4 critical questions through a lens of UDL. And then we also provided one of our grade levels, 3rd grade, has a planning document that they use. And it's a staff-facing and parent-facing document that goes home, and people are able to see tiered access points for people to use. So lots of information that people can use, as well as the link to the TIE Center out of the University of Minnesota.
Wonderful. So a tremendous thank you to Mark Twain Elementary for sharing your journey today. And we'll just wait a second here for
Hold on,
slides to change over.
Make it work.
Or again. Perfect.
Hold on, you guys, keep going. Let me.
Well, so we will be doing a quick share in the chat, and before we have that set up, I just again want to reiterate how grateful we are to Twain for sharing their passion and vulnerability and expertise, and we are so excited to see you as you continue on this journey. So to share and close us out, we'd love to hear from you. What are the systems, culture, and or leadership practices you heard about today that support inclusive schools, and what are some initial steps that you can take back to your own schools? So go ahead and you can share that in the chat. And I also see. Oh, and there was a question I also see about how to access the links shared in the artifacts. Cassie, if you could give us some direction on that, that would be great.
Yeah, so without the PowerPoint, you can't access the links. So when we post the presentation, those links will be there along with an attached folder to the presentation that will have all of those artifacts. And I know I said by the end of the month, and Molly, not putting any pressure on you, but Molly's much quicker than that. So I'm sure she'll have the presentation up along with those shared artifacts that you can take a look at and use up on our website, which we'll be sharing in just a minute.
Thanks, Cassie. So I'm seeing some great responses, thinking about the adult versus student problem. Often, as Craig said, it's the adult problem that we need to focus on. No need for a replacement curriculum. There's no one way to do this. So wonderful to see all that. Just wow, Twain is amazing. I love that. And just how wonderful it is to see staff working with parents and all collaborating in providing those authentic experiences. So thank you for sharing that in the chat there. We really appreciate connecting with you all through the chat throughout the presentation. Keep moving us through here. Wonderful. So we just wanted to reiterate that if you would like to connect in the future with our wonderful team here that shared today, please reach out to us at the Herring Center, and we would be more than happy to share their emails and contact information with you for that ongoing connection and around inclusion. Great. So to learn more about the Demonstration Sites Project and OSPI's Inclusionary Practices Professional Development Project, please visit these websites or feel free to email us at uwdemosites@uw.edu. Also visit our website where we will be posting a recording of the webinar, and as Cassie said, along with that folder with the resources and artifacts that Twain presented to us today. And while you are on our website, we encourage you to sign up for some of our virtual visits. Our first cohort of demonstration sites are hosting virtual visits that allows for schools to have a more personalized visit based on their inclusionary practices needs. Now I'm going to pass it along to Cassie, who will lead us through a collaborative activity.
Thank you so much. So it looks like we have it activated. So if you have a cell phone device or want to do it on the poll everywhere, you can see the web link up there. So all you have to do is text Herring Center to 22333 and put one word about the systems, culture, or leadership practices you heard about to support inclusive schools at Twain.
I'm seeing Twain. I believe that's mind shift. There we go. Compassion, collaboration. Awesome. Those resonate with me as well. Patience.
Great.
Believe, creativity. Awesome. Family.
We'll keep those coming and keep typing those in. And this is something that we can share with Twain later. And it gives us, again, some more additional feedback about some of what you noticed. And I'll come back to this in just a minute.
Great, thanks, Cassie. So we would love to get feedback about our session today. This will give us information we can use to effectively share demo sites journeys in webinar format in the future. So please click this link and fill out the brief survey through Google Forms. This survey is anonymous. Molly will send clock hour forms to those who are in attendance after the webinar. Thank you to OSPI and CSTEP for their partnerships in this project. And another thanks to the Mark Twain Bobcats for your inspiring work. And thanks to all of you for joining us today to learn more about inclusionary practices and for envisioning how you might take some of what you learned today and apply it to your schools. We hope you will join us for future webinars and that when our doors open again, you will take advantage in person of visiting our Washington State demonstration site. Thanks so much.